Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard.
The world's oceans are rising. In the U.S., a new report by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration projects that sea levels along the U.S. coast will rise 10 to 12 inches over the next 30 years.
My son's house on the upper street was totally destroyed. The place was brand new.
Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
All right. My name is Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined by our producer, Jake, and by our graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And in a little while, we are going to be joined by two of the four hosts of What's Left of Philosophy, which is one of our favorite non-GTAA podcasts. And as a bonus, these are What's Left of Philosophy hosts who have not been on the show before. So this is fresh What's Left of Philosophy content. And in the post game, we are going to be joined by Matt Leck, who, fun fact, was the very first guest on this show. The very first episode in August 2020. But meanwhile, I have no idea how I was talked into doing a segment on this. What you just watched was at least the before and after of the slap at the Oscars. I hate myself for even asking, but what do you guys think? Give me some takes.
Team Will.
I think if I start saying what my actual takes are, I'm just gonna dissolve into a puddle of liquid. It just my brain is gonna melt. But I hope everyone enjoyed my little dabbling in experimental film. Kind of it was my college reunion this weekend, so it takes me back to my college days of really exploring the boundaries of experimental film. So I hope everyone enjoyed that piece.
Nice. I think it perfectly encapsulated what I think. And look, if we were going to actually do the thing itself, I mean, Jed is definitely on Andy's page about this, and I get it, right? Somebody says something that hurts your wife's feelings, you go. You feel the impulse to stand up for her. I mean, that's a reasonable human thing that I think everybody can understand. I think if we're going to do it from the Oscars perspective, you probably don't want it to set the precedent that somebody can just walk up on stage and hit people if the jokes are too over the line or whatever, which probably in its intention this wasn't even. Yeah, Jane was hot. I don't know what to say about that. But I think that I certainly understand why it's a sensitive issue. But having done that 30 seconds on the thing itself, which is already too much because that adds to the 100,000 million hours that have already been spent on Oscar slap discourse, I think what I find most interesting on this is just the fact that this is a personal altercation between two guys that nobody who's watching this will ever meet. And it has nothing to do with politics, but people, man, they find ways to project or some sort of somehow read politics into the cracks of what's going on here in a bizarre way that I think, I mean, look, I also think there's a I also think there's a discussion to be had about the fact that there's a way to be, as Andy would put it, Team Will without being a crazy person, but there's a lot of crazy person takes about how actually, this joke was violence, and and we could have a whole discussion about why say that speech can be violence is dangerously insane. But again, what I find interesting, what I find kind of emblematic of the moment, and maybe some of what's broken about American society and our particular, high-tech late capitalist hellscape, is the fact that this personal altercation between two millionaires who you don't know has become something that people find ways to sort of pseudo politicize in all these ways. So let's get some of the bad takes. Okay, one Sarah Spector says, if only Will Smith got as upset when white men take away his right to vote. That is a take. All right.
There's so many angles about that take that are confusing, right? Like, I get what she's saying, like she's essentializing Will Smith to his race, right? Because I don't think like he's literally one of the richest, most, successful Hollywood actors has had his right to vote taken away, on top of the offensiveness of like the weird, like, I'm going to bring his race into it to dunk on him. Like, just very, very strange. She was thinking about a lot of stuff. And then I think that's kind of the theme that I'm seeing from a lot of these.
Yeah. And it's also like, okay, when you talk about these laws to make it harder to vote, it's, like what is true is that the intention is that it's going to lower Democratic turnout because the theory is that, which is correct, right? Lower income people who have less time or, more likely to maybe not have driver's licenses, for example, however many hoops you can jump through, that they'll, like the more hoops you jump through, the more you're going to get people just going opportunity cost. Never mind, I'm not going to bother, right? All that's totally true. And it's also totally true, of course, that due to America's apartheid history, that Black people are more likely than white people, to be at the bottom, disproportionately of the economic ladder. And this is not unrelated to voting patterns. This is also not unrelated to the Republicans' intentions. All 100% true. But notice the first link in that chain is low income. Will Smith's right to vote is very, 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 very safe.
Yeah, I don't think he's been low income since, the 80s.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, stick it right in my veins. Let's get the next one.
I'm going to defend this one.
Jeffrey D. Spencer says, what Will Smith did to Chris Rock is the same as what Putin did to Ukraine. All right, bold claim. Let's see where it goes.
But he's laying out his premises very, very well. All right.
Sure. So we're starting with the conclusion. Then we're going to get to premises. So we're going to provocative conclusion. Let's see what he's got. Just the same. Putin felt threatened and disturbed. Will felt threatened and disturbed. We all love violence. Let's admit it. War, this is my favorite part, is the same as hitting. It's hitting cities. I bet Putin loved it. I feel why Will did it.
So I was saying I was playing a game with a friend of like, what's the craziest take that you'll kind of like, you kind of dig, like kind of like a Marianne Williamson type take, where like you're like, that's not exactly right, but spiritually I feel what he's going for. It's like kind of poetic about toxic masculinity, and like maybe hitting a city really is like hitting a person on a poetic level. It's incredibly insane, but I don't know, I kind of agree, but I'm curious what people's takes are. I see we have that is genius, and this is the dumbest shit, and both are true. All right.
It's a bit like, when those riots happen and a building gets burnt down. It's just like when you burn down a person. I don't know.
It's poetic.
Has anybody been lit on fire recently that I can analogize?
I mean, okay. I do also want to point out that, again, I don't reckon, I think that I think anybody who has a take on the thing itself beyond bad moment, but you can understand how he got there, is probably thinking about this too much. But I mean, I watched that video several times, like everybody else in the world. It wasn't even like it wasn't even closed fist. I mean, that seems pretty different than dropping cluster bombs on, on a city in Ukraine to me. Like being slapped is, I mean, traditionally, for example, when you're challenging someone to a duel, right, you do that by slapping them. The actual duel would be a much bigger deal than the slap, and possibly, dropping a cluster bomb on somebody's apartment complex would be an even bigger deal than dueling them. I don't know. That's just
I mean, you're probably right. I mean, I guess I wish maybe that Vladimir Putin had an avenue for male bravado, right? He could have just slapped Zelensky, and then walked back, and that would have been it.
Yeah, walked back, sat down in his seat, yelled a couple times, it's like, you keep your military alliance.
Ben, well, you know what? Someone else has a similar
backyard.
Someone has a similar take, Ben. Michael Tracy. Great minds think alike.
Yeah, there you go.
If Zelensky didn't want to get bombed, he shouldn't have said that thing about what he did about Steven Seagal's hair.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of people who've gone through whatever's wrong with Steven Seagal, are very sensitive about their hair. So there you go. Yeah, Michael Tracy having that is not surprising to me. I have. So I did something that was kind of billed as a debate with Michael Tracy once, and it was a very strange experience because I guess the way I would put it is that he seems like somebody who has takes more than he has positions.
Mm.
So let's just leave it at that. But I think that the Putin is Will Smith. His Will Smith take is very on point for that. All right, I think we've got at least one more of these.
Yeah. Well, this is an article that Andy alerted us to. The Will Smith Doctrine Has No Place in Ukraine by Matthew de Ancona. And this is he writes for The Tortoise, which the punchline to this is their tagline is slow news without the noise. Slow news, in other words, getting out an article.
First thing this morning, first thing I saw whenever I got up, I turned on Twitter. This was the article I saw.
So this guy was up till 2 a.m. doing his slow news analogy
with that meme with the woman looking at math equations, how do I put this together?
Which is hilarious because we don't have this one, but last night our good friend David Griscom tweeted. This is from memory, but I think this is it word for word. I can't wait for all of the Will Smith, Chris Rock takes. Is Will Smith going to be Zelensky, or is Chris Rock going to be Zelensky? And there you go. He perfectly anticipated these people. So I think there's an actual explanation of that I saw of the Will Smith doctrine, which is that he said I didn't read the article and I'm not going to, but I saw him tweet about it, and he said that it was something about how if Putin is rewarded with diplomatic concessions, Ukrainian neutrality for invading Ukraine, that'll be like Will Smith being, I guess because he got the Academy Award after. I'm not going to read this article, but as far as I can piece together what the thought might be, that would be it, or just that.
That's the subheading on that graphic. If you pull that back up,
okay, all right.
You can actually, it's actually paraphrased, which is why I didn't pull the tweet.
All right, I can't quite.
Acts of aggression should not be rewarded, and President Biden was only speaking the unpalatable truth when he said that Putin has to go. Commonly known as the Will Smith doctrine, whatever the new foreign policy establishment's term for. Ben, we don't have it, but you retweeted something that I think it was a philosopher said that, like, from the utilitarian perspective, yes, the slap hurts, but it's very funny for millions, if not billions, of people. So it created net good in the world, and I think that anything beyond that, I like that you feel really passionately about, probably says more about you and your own biases and your own neuroses than, anything actual, any referent in the world. Is my definitive take on it, I would say.
No, I mean, I certainly concur with your take, but I'm also still trying to piece together the Will Smith analogy to regime change in Russia. So, like, is the idea that just like Putin has to go, which, by the way, like, there is a reason that the Biden people walked that back as soon as Grandpa said that, right? That is a second time I used the phrase tonight, but it fits, right? I mean, that is a dangerously insane thing to say.
And that was off script that he said that, I think.
Yeah, I believe. I mean, at least I watched part of Breaking Points this morning. They said that was off script.
You can usually tell whenever he's off script because he usually seems a little bit more.
Yeah, you get a little more of the dog-faced pony soldiers, and we're pursuing regime change in our standoff with the world's other major nuclear power.
Corn Pop was a bad dude.
Corn Pop, regime change in Russia, stuff like this. He really needs to read what it says in the teleprompter right now, at least of all times. But also, okay, so what's the equivalent to regime change in Russia? Are they going to, like, replace Will Smith with somebody else as Jada's husband, or what am I? I'm not quite following this.
There's got to be some. There's got to be some analogy to the open relationship part of it with NATO.
That's how it's coming back.
And mutual aggression, right? Like, maybe there's, Will and Jada are in NATO and together, and just give me 24 hours and about $10 an hour and financial instability, and I'll crank it out.
Cobble something together.
Yeah, it reminds me of, like, my journalist friends, like, their first job in the industry, like, right, like, you have to put some take together, and that's it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, I hope we can. I hope this isn't just a day of this. I hope we can do, like, a month of Will Smith discourse. In fact, I hope that, like, if they finally if the United States finally agrees to take a more direct role in negotiations, and everything gets sorted out, and there's, I don't know, like, some deal where the Russian claim on Crimea and Donbass is ratified, and Ukraine's can be neutral, but there's also, like, future security guarantees. I hope that none of us, like, even realized that it happened until 3 days later, because we were all still talking about Will Smith.
Well, with the American, with, like, the media's, especially the media's, like, bloodlust for war, right? Like, basically asking, why didn't you do World War III in the press conferences? Maybe it's fucking better for them to just pay attention to this for 2 weeks, and then, like, they'll be like, guys, it's over. I'm sorry, but we didn't do World War III. And
right, then we could have a press conference where they all get outraged because they just realized that there was a peaceful settlement.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened with that?
Yeah.
So excited.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, well, there is the natural transition between these topics has not been invented, but I do want to plug a couple things. So, one, starting on Sunday, I am teaching a class at Michael Albert's thing, the School for Social and Cultural Change, called Analyzing Marx's Arguments, Capital Volume 1. So we are going to be going through Capital Volume 1 in 8 weeks. So it's going to be the first 8 Sunday afternoons EST. So 1 to 3 EST Sunday afternoons on Zoom in all 4 Sundays in April and the first 4 in May. So we're going to do one section a Sunday. which is a lot, but I think if you really want to get through this thing, if you have whatever weird completist itch about whatever, I mean, I get it. I read Infinite Jest. This is the way. I think this is a good way to do it with Capital, and the focus is going to be on reconstructing the arguments, and like not all of them, obviously, because it's a very long book and it's only 8 sessions, but a lot of the key arguments from throughout the book about what's Marx's argument that the only thing that value can be is congealed labor time. What's Marx's argument about how wage labor works, whatever, and what are the cases where this might rely on some technical economic premise that's a little dubious 155 years later? What are the cases where it's totally independent of that and absolutely defensible right now, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it should be fun. And I think I mean, I'm not going to lie to anybody. First few chapters are a slog, but once you get past them, right, I think that you don't find a lot of people who've read Capital who enjoy it, and that's not just survivorship bias for the people who get through it. Like there's a reason, right? I mean, that's a really rich book, lots of literary allusions and historical examples, and really like novel, interesting arguments that are worth engaging with. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think if you have maybe tried to get through Capital before and you haven't succeeded, then this might be a way to, nobody has to confess on air. This might be a way to get through that, right? Because I mean, if you have like some things to latch onto for at least for each section, right? I mean, here's like one of the big arguments that Marx is making here. Then I think it makes it a lot easier to go through and say, okay, I see what he's up to. Your eyes don't just start glazing over, when you go back to the text. At least that's my hope for that. All right. You guys want to take it? I can talk to Michael Albert and copy it. Just let me know.
No. Oh yeah. I was gonna say I was admitting that that I haven't actually worked my way through because I plan to take the class. I also plan to take a different class that didn't work out, but this one I'm saying it on air. I'm going to take it so that I can't expose myself as a fraud, ever again on Marxist theory. So follow my journey as I become an expert on the book.
Yeah, see Ben slap Marx's arguments like Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, and see if they stand up at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's okay though. It's okay because like even when you slap around a little bit about some of the stuff about the labor theory of value. I mean, there's the core analysis of capitalism will just like go on and present the best documentaries award.
He took it well, like Chris Rock. He stood his ground. So did the arguments. You said there was no good transition, but I think we found.
There we go. We should have done that to start with.
A perfect one.
Nice. I should also say while we're doing all of this that. I am going to be in Toronto late next month. So doing 2 things while I'm there on the 21st and 22nd of April. So on the 21st at the Duke of York pub in Toronto, going to be doing a reading and signing of the Hitchens book. And that you can just show up to, but we've got that nice looking poster there that Andy designed, and we will put the link to that info in the description. We'll also put a link in the description to the other thing that I'll be doing while I'm in Toronto, which is the next night on Friday, the 22nd of April. I'm going to be giving a talk at Ryerson University. I know they're going to change the name, but they haven't yet. So for now, still Ryerson, about Marx's relationship to philosophical liberalism. That one is ticketed it's free, but it's ticketed just because space is limited in the room. So we will also, it's not in there yet, I think, but we will put a link in the description to this episode where you can reserve a ticket to that if you're going to be in Toronto on the 22nd and you want to come see me talk about that. All right. We are, so I will just go ahead and say right now, make a executive decision here and say that the labor segment is going to be in the post game with Matt Leck. We'll do that there, but it is going to be a fun one. Got some leaked audio from a captive audience meeting the workers had to go to with Union Busters that did not go well for the Union Busters, which is a treat to listen to. So we're going to be doing that and a bunch of other stuff in the post game with Matt Leck after this. But for right now, do we have the clip? Actually, also, man, there keep on being transitions here. I'm just missing in the moment. Also in Toronto in 2019 from repeat past guest on this show, Slavoj Žižek, talking to, I'll just optimistically say future guest, Dr. Jordan Peterson.
That's my problem. Why do you call? Give me no. It's not a rhetorical question for politely saying you are an idiot. You don't know what you are talking about. It's simply I would like to know, because you and I like this often when you attack somebody, you say it aggressively and what should read more. Tell me whom. So I'm asking you now, not read more. I don't advise you, but who are? Give me some names and so on. And who are these postmodern, egalitarian, neo-Marxists? And where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an impotent, an utterly impotent moralization. Please, I'm so sorry that I was
No, that's no problem.
Please.
Well, I mean, organization like Jonathan Haidt's, what's it called?
Oh, this is so embarrassing. This is so hard to watch.
Yeah, so I am now joined by Gil Morjon and Owen Gwyn Williams of What's Left of Philosophy. How are you doing tonight, guys?
Great.
Yeah,
I didn't know you were coming to Toronto. I'll have to come out and see you when you're here.
Oh, yep, just a few weeks.
Cool.
So,
yeah, very cool. Thanks for having us, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, had Lillian on the show a few times in the past, so thought we'd do the Dudes Rock edition of the What's Left of Philosophy crossover. But I did want to get you guys' take on this, because one thing that so that footage that we watched of Jordan Peterson with his like head slept forward,
head hung in shame. It's really difficult to see. You hate to see someone struggle like that.
But you also love to see it.
And maybe you love to see it a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, both of those things. And that is from 2019. So it's been a little bit less than 3 years. That was like over the summer, I think, that debate. But just now, just in the last couple of weeks, he has finally come up with an answer to Flavoj's question.
It took a couple of years, but it's a great answer.
Yeah. You can tell he's taken this time
Rich.
to really do his research,
Yeah.
I
love this list so much.
All right. I'm not going to actually. Do either of you guys do a good Jordan Peterson?
Nope.
Okay.
I haven't tried.
Postmodern neo-Marxists.
Oh, that's
Ibram
not
X.
bad.
Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Robin DiAngelo, Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, Andrea Dworkin, Naomi Klein, Catherine McKinnon, Judith Butler, Jacques Derrida, and perhaps above all, Michel Foucault. This list is not complete.
Well, I think it's worth marking to begin with that in the original tweet, which he deleted, he did list Foucault twice.
He did list Foucault
he
twice.
said in the middle of the list was like Michel Foucault, and at the end of it, last but not least, again, Michel Foucault. So I think, Foucault's the crux of the problem, probably. But
probably, yeah. I mean, his original tweet too, which again he deleted. You can still find it because the thread still exists, and he didn't delete the remainder of the thread. And the very next tweet just says Angela Davis.
Oh yeah, so good.
Fire.
Awesome.
I couldn't have made it up. Like, it's the best.
Yeah, did you have a favorite on that list of like who, like, you're surprised that they made it on there, or psyched to see them make an appearance?
Well, I mean, I will say I have a favorite on that list, which is Catherine McKinnon.
Noted postmodernist and neo-Marxist.
Yeah, both of those things, right?
Definitely both of those things. Definitely both of those things.
Didn't she write a piece against, like a major piece, like against postmodernism?
Yes. Yeah.
That doesn't really matter though.
That one's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think that I like the juxtaposition of like actual anti-capitalists like Naomi Klein with Robin DiAngelo, famed corporate consultant and guilt monger. You know,
I mean, like non-rhetorically, like how many total pages of any of these thinkers do you think he's actually read? Like
5.
He might have had to read Foucault or something, and I don't know when he did graduate school, but
maybe
you think so? I mean, like
probably not.
I mean, the honest question.
That's true.
Because I mean, he's like a clinical psychologist. Like,
I think in the 90s is when in the social sciences there was real kind of traction. Foucault got real kind of traction, but yeah, I don't know in psychology.
So like the list is very funny for a lot of reasons, and like maybe we can talk a little bit about like what's going on with this meme, right, which has been floating around for much. I mean, when Zizek brought this up at that debate, it was because he had been talking about so-called postmodern neo-Marxism for years already, right? And like, I guess like we should try to figure out what he thinks that means, because I still have no idea. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I found in one place, I think he did like a blog post, which you can find on his site. And he also gave a talk at York University in Toronto, I think maybe 4 years ago. And there he says something like, the definition goes something like, well, postmodernism is the idea that any interpretation goes, right? So like there is no, we can't epistemically, regulate and validate interpretations, that they are just, all interpretations are potentially valid. We can never adjudicate between different interpretations of the world. It's total nihilistic chaos.
Right. A thing that famously anyone has ever thought. But okay.
Marxists in their attempt to like scientifically understand the economy famously adhered to this postmodern view. But then, the first part is that there's, interpretive chaos, right? Any interpretation goes, right? That's what he says. The first part,
full interpretive chaos.
And then, and the second part is like, well, you actually can't really navigate the world. This is what he says. You can't navigate the world with this. Any interpretation goes. You need some interpretations, and so Marxism just happens to be like a convenient one floating around, like a convenient interpretation floating around. That doesn't really matter whether it's true or false. It gives our resentments and our desire to like attack people that are successful or whatever. It gives an interpretation of the world that is like practically rewarding, let's say, right? So that seems to be, I guess, how they go together, is that the postmodernism leaves you confused. Well, once you're confused, the Marxism comes in and tells you, listen, I know we don't really know anything, but at least you can hate rich people. Like that's basically, I think, how he views.
That's cool.
Them going together, which is cool.
Yeah, that is cool. And I guess then, like, why not just Marxism? Why neo-Marxism? Is because like it is also somehow actually unmoored from like material relations and has nothing to do with class, right? So like and like other grifters who we've spoken about like do this too. James Lindsay talks about so-called like race Marxism, and he's like, oh, it's just Marxism, but where you swap out all class concepts for race concepts. And it's like, first of all, what are you talking about? How would that work?
That's like, that's what neo-Marxism means.
Neo-Marxism means, yeah.
It's like, the Marxists used to talk about bourgeois versus proletariat. The neo-Marxists talk about like women versus the patriarchy, or like, queer people versus like hetero patriarchy.
Yeah, then you could have like Christian neo-Marxism, where you talk about like God and the devil instead.
Hell yeah, absolutely.
It's to basically be the same thing.
You do need some kind of like Manichaean antagonism, right? But it really doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything, really. And I just do love, like, you're talking before, Ben, your course on capital sounds very exciting. But like, imagine what it would look like to take any part of Capital, right? The book is 3 volumes long. Just pick any chapter from Capital 1, like chapter 10 on the working day, and be like, just sub out all the class concepts for race concepts. What would that mean? What does that mean?
Well, instead of the working day, it would be the workplace anti-racism training.
Ooh, yeah. The seminar, the sensitivity training. That's how they're extending the working day by like making you go to more and more.
The DEI seminar.
DEI initiatives. Yeah. Okay, so that's a pretty incoherent mashup of nonsense ideas. So this is we're cooking already. This feels good, you know.
I mean, one thing I guess I would say semi-seriously on that is that, I mean, not very, because I don't think that'd be appropriate, but like, is that it is like we do know what Peterson read of Marx, at least, right? Like that's public.
He said the Communist Manifesto.
We do
right?
now. He was forced to read the manifesto.
He read the manifesto.
Yeah, because he wasn't going to read any Zizek.
Oh, Lord knows. Certainly not.
So I thought, well, okay, I don't have time to do that, right? So I'm just going to like read the Communist Manifesto, and that's where all the trouble started, he said. And
sure.
I don't know what he got out of it exactly.
Very unclear.
But I think that
bad guys and good guys, I think he has a very biblical, or at least his understanding of the Bible.
Yeah, Bible as filtered through Joseph Campbell. You know, it's really an impressive intellectual feat he's performing here with this synthesis. But what did he get?
Well, I was just gonna say it does seem like that's revealing, right? Like that it's not. Because it's not like, you know, I mean, if you tried to substitute out any part of capital and like, you know, do the global search and replace function, you know, for like to do, I don't know, whatever, you know, black people and white people or gay people and straight people or men and women or whatever, right? You know, like, you know, none of that would make sense even at the level of like the chapter titles or anything.
No, it would immediately become incoherent.
But you know, I guess if what you really know is the Communist Manifesto, and let's be real, what you really, really know is like the opening paragraphs of the Communist Manifesto, then like you can kind of see it because it's just like, well, there's some sort of talk about different groups being in opposition, and I gather that this has something or other to do with oppression.
Yes.
And so therefore, you know, anything that follows that structure is basically kind of a Marxism. You know?
The therefore is doing a whole lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Let's just say, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, what's frustrating, among other things, is that like, look, like anti-racist and like feminist, anti-patriarchal struggles theorists and like activists have worked very hard for decades to figure out how precisely to articulate their critiques of the hierarchies that they're, you know, specifically concerned with, and a sort of more Marxist historical materialist analysis of capitalism in its specificity. And then you get this goober come along and just be like, it's all the same, or nothing matters. It's you know, wildly like irresponsible at the level of like the actual state of the discourse.
I mean, I hesitate. I go back and forth hesitating how much to actually engage with substantively whether any of these like thinkers or writers fit into the postmodern neo-Marxist thing. Like, I think you could fit, I think under his definition, right, you could kind of just fit anything in. Anybody that that actually, let's say, like cares about justice or something, or expresses a sentiment like there's injustice in the world, maybe we should ameliorate it. Like that for him, I think qualifies as postmodern Marxism, right? Like it's any injustice you find, and you can obviously, as soon as you identify an injustice, there's going to be, if you're smart, some perpetrating entity and some, you know, victimized entity. And then as soon as you get into that, like, well, somebody had to be subjected to the injustice. Well, as soon as you talk about any group of people being subjected to injustice, now you're in group warfare, which is one step away from class warfare, which is like one step away from totalitarian, like, you know, gulags. And
it's definitely it's definitely totalitarianism in Nietzsche. We all know that.
100%.
Yeah. They are coming.
I wonder how that.
Yeah.
I just like I wonder how that gets traction. Like I mean, I genuinely wonder. I mean, I guess more Marx's question would be to ask, instead of engaging with the details of whatever crap he's saying here, like, why does this sentiment, why do his ideas, like, why did they have traction? How can the idea that like DEI programs, which I think can be oftentimes as ridiculous as anyone else thinks they might be, how do you actually get there from there to we are actually sliding into a Stalinist regime? And I know you can say that, and we can logically critique it. Obviously, it's dumb, but it has salience for people. Like same with like COVID restrictions being like one step away from gulags and all that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think like, well, so the first thing I want to say in response to this is that like one of the great ironies of Jordan Peterson using this language as like a damning epithet is that his shtick is the most postmodern gibberish that you could possibly encounter. Just like an incoherent mashup of like half-formed ideas, like I said, from like Campbellian theories of myth and like the great chaos feminine dragon,
Jungian archetypes.
Jungian archetypes.
Well, and we could even talk about is like, I mean, it's really specifically like, I mean, you guys listen to, I mean, if you haven't, then I wouldn't encourage you to. But like, if the way back in like 2018, I think when Peterson first started to really blow up, he went on Sam Harris's podcast, and I think it was called Waking Up back then, and he did this like long conversation with Sam Harris where they ended up just talking about truth the entire time.
Oh,
and
is this around the time where he was talking about logos a lot?
Yeah,
he had a logos phase.
Him and Derrida. He actually has more in common with Derrida than you think.
Well, this is the interesting thing, because it's okay. So you were talking earlier about how this kind of like anything goes, like epistemic chaos view is like a little uncharitable as a reading of like anything that a postmodern, thinker has said, and that's probably true. I would point out that those guys are not always completely clear about what they're saying about some of this stuff.
Go ahead and grant that point.
Sure. So, the extent to which there might be some kind of relativism or skepticism about truth or knowledge or both going on, with like Foucault or somebody is like, you have to, there's some interpretive work going on to like figure that out. Right. But, so far so good. So but like the most wildly uncharitable interpretation of those guys, right? Like of what they're doing. Like, but
that's,
is not unlike what Peterson is actually saying, right?
Right.
Like,
that's the wild thing. Yeah. He's not, in fact, like a post-structuralist thinker. He's the caricature of a post-structuralist that he peddles, which is wild, right?
I actually think,
No, go ahead.
No, I also think that like Zizek hits the nail on the head when he calls it, I can't remember how he described it, but he basically said this whole postmodern neo-Marxism sounds like something like moralism. Like it's just a way of trying to dismiss and devalue a bunch of stuff in advance. And I think that's ultimately what the issue is for him, is that all of those names just seem to float around in an ether that he associates with a kind of ethical crisis. And like for me, the postmodern part of him is that it always seems to me that regardless of the various different iterations of his arguments, it always comes down to something like an ethical argument, like the ethos one has to try to cultivate in this world of chaos. And in this world of chaos, we're being told all these confusing things. You can't run a civilization with these gender ideas, and you know what I mean. It's a pragmatist, like functional argument, right?
Very much
it's like
so, yeah.
it isn't about truth. It isn't about. It's like it is nothing.
Nice.
It's a very postmodern argument, which is like these are different. This is a way of interpreting the world. It's a Nietzschean argument in a certain way, right? A way of interpreting the world that brings with it a certain set of dispositions and behaviors, and like for him, the kind of Judeo-Christian, whatever he means by that, right? The Judeo-Christian, whatever he means by that, that's a way of interpreting the world that like seems to be really functional for the kinds of societies we had maybe in the 50s or something. You know what I mean? Like
back in the 50s, back when the world made sense.
Yeah, so it really is postmodern neo-Christianism.
I'm sorry. Like,
yeah. Well, the reason it's like a reactionary version of like this postmodernism, like, I think you're right that there's like a very Nietzschean line about it, right? Like, oh no, here we are. Looks like God is dead. What are we going to do now? Right.
Yeah, nice.
But of course, like Nietzsche says like, well, time to start creating your own values. And Peterson's like, go back to the way we thought about gender in the 1930s. Like this is a totally
or
different,
pseudo biology. Like don't actually study biology, but like, so that's the weird thing is that he does want to sometimes say that there's some pseudo biological basis for the fact that Western, like what he considers to be like Western institutions and traditions are the most functional and right ones. I guess it's grounded in kind of social Darwinian ideas. Sociobiology, not really Darwinian. I don't know, but so he does try to like smuggle in every now and then a biological basis for his thoroughly postmodern like functional pragmatism.
Yeah, I mean, it feels so when he talks about biology, it always feels like it's some sort of weird fable that's like, that's like input
fable's the right word,
biological like language, right? But because he'll say a little bit about sexual selection, and he likes that, right?
He's super into that stuff now too. Yeah, so he had the algorithm. Unfortunately, sent me one of his videos, which was one of these like, how do women choose men?
So
he has I didn't click on it, but
that's a nightmare. I don't even want to contemplate what that would be about. But I mean, what's so funny is like the like almost immediate proximity to like the most extreme versions of actually existing postmodern thinkers. Like when you were talking about like the reference to biology as myth, I'm like, Donna Haraway makes that argument actually, which again would mortify
postmodern neo-Marxists.
A postmodern neo-Marxist, which would terrify our friend Jordan, I'm sure, to learn that he's in anything like company here.
Yeah, I mean, so there are two things. Like one, I mean, yes to all that, and then like also like when he actually talks about, you kind of said this earlier, but I mean, just kind of underline it and circle it. Like when he actually talks about truth, like he does for like an hour or so in that conversation with Harris, because I think this is like very early Peterson, and he's like, I don't know, I think he's nervous, and he goes on about it for a really, really, really long time. And and
hi, Justin.
Oh man, when I first started reading it, I was like, damn, that's pretty harsh and not inaccurate. And then, okay.
Well,
our boy.
Yeah.
Well, my hot take on Deleuze, I could defend sometime, is that he's just Carnat for people who like a little whiff of continental obscurity, with their meta philosophy. But I mean, it's the same basic idea. But anyway, but I think but he says very explicitly, right, that he thinks that truth isn't about correspondence to reality or anything like that. That that truth is defined in terms of like what helps, I mean, there's this sort of weird quasi-Darwinist part of it, but it's like, it's just this pragmatist thing that it's totally what helps the human species survive. And I've got to say, listening to that, I've said this before, like I've never felt so much sympathy for Sam Harris as I did with him in that conversation, because as he keeps trying to like make these points about, well, okay, Jordan, but what if there was like a chemical like weapons lab and like a or like a chemical research lab and something leaked and then like it wiped out the entire human race, right? Like that would be very bad for human survival, but that wouldn't mean the theory of chemistry was false, right? And
fair point.
It just sounded like nothing so much as like an overworked kind of harried adjunct professor trying to explain something to the world's most confused undergraduate. It's like no, but I don't think the truth is okay. But what about the chemical weapons lab? And it's again, this is like the thing that at my least charitable, right, when I'm trying to figure out like what some like post-structuralist thinkers is saying, and like at like my most mean-spirited interpretation of what they're saying, it's basically that.
Yeah, that actually is really a nice example, because I think it lets me put, and let me know what you all think of this, like my finger on one of his basic confusions, which is actually, I think, endemic to a lot of conservative discourse on this stuff, where like they take social construction to mean like anti-realism, right? Like so if, for instance, we make the case that like there is an element of social construction to the process of scientific knowledge production, so that we might have to, if we're depending on which sociologist of science we're reading, like how seriously do we take the internal culture of the group of scientists who formulate these chemical processes. that doesn't mean anti-realism, right? And like the best example of this, I forget, someone said this to me recently, like houses are also socially constructed, and they're pretty clearly real, right? And so like, but he, I think, can't disarticulate these things. So when he hears people talk about how like gender is socially constructed, he thinks that that means that there's a denial of it having any sort of ontologically real status, so that then you can just like, you know, say or do whatever you want, and there's no consistency to it. But that's just not what any social constructivists actually think. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
No, go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, I mean, to be fair, I think at least on a sort of grassroots level, you know, a lot of leftists actually do use phrases like socially constructed in ways that are a little bit ambiguous between those two, right? Like you know, is
Totally.
you know, like, do you think that, you know, I don't know, in some ways a slightly less complicated example, but I mean, like, do you think that, you know, race is like that, like race is a real thing, but it's just a sociological thing, right? Or do you think that, you know, there's no such thing, that, you know, that it's a, you know, it's a nonsense category? And there are people who actually think both of those things and will, like, you know, and will like defend like articulated versions of them. But my sense talking to a lot of people is that that phrase socially constructed in practice kind of often lets them not have to quite pick between those two.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself here, like I take the criterion for something being real just that it has like effects. And so, like, you know, you don't need to be able to point to either like a metaphysical essence of something like race, or even a particular biological substrate. You know, notoriously, there's oftentimes greater difference genetically within supposed groups than, you know, between them, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the relationship between genes and phenotypical expression is extraordinarily unclear and hard to parse. But there's clearly differences in terms of how people are treated in terms of race. So it gets to count as real in my book. And I'm not sure that there needs to be, you know, I don't think you need to have worked out all of those other sorts of, you know, on the ground scientific or biological accounts in order to be able to make that very obvious sociological point. But again, if you like start to get into the, like, this is maybe one of the things Owen was saying before, like, boy, once you start engaging substantively with some of these people, like with the Jordan Peterson, like you maybe almost have lost the game already. It was never that serious of a charge, I would say. But like, go ahead, please.
No, go for it, Owen, please.
Yeah, I mean, another like charitable way of understanding, I think, some of the stuff he's dismissing as postmodernism and of understanding the kind of problem of social construction is that the more charitable insight, way to understand the insight, is just to see it as a basic claim that knowledge is mediated, right? That we don't and have immediate access to, like, you don't even have to get rid of the correspondence theory of truth to maintain that knowledge is mediated. Like, yes, okay, like we do investigate and apprehend an objective world, but not in an unmediated fashion. And those mediations, the things that stand mediately between us and the world, are infused with histories that bear, you know, that with histories that involve power relations, that involve oppression, and, you know, yeah, the whole history of social structures and ideologies. And that's a part of how we relate to and, you know, perceive the world, a part of how we accumulate knowledge. But it isn't to say that all we have is just a play of different ways of interpreting the world in terms of power and, you know, and different social systems of injustice and oppression. It's that the way that we apprehend the world is mediated through those histories, right? And it's had important impacts on the ways that we apprehend and study and understand the world, right? I think that's a more charitable. But again, that's not like, we're already so far beyond any type of conversation that I think a tweet like that is even meant to.
Well, okay,
to instigate.
Let's go back to it. And yeah, so all right, so we're just talking about whether you know, race is best understood as like a constructed social category, or whether we should say, well, there's no such thing as race, there's racism, you know, or like what you should say about that. All interesting questions. You know, these are, you know, have debates about this stuff where you could have, you know, like, I think somebody like Barbara Fields maybe would be closer to the second view, and and there are all these people who have these theories of racial capitalism and stuff who'd be closer to the first view. But then, of course, you have the author here who is here listed of a book called Anti-Racist Baby, Ibram X. Kendi, who I'm not even sure. So, I guess I was going to ask if Ibram X. Kendi is supposed to be a postmodernist or a Marxist or both. But I guess they're all supposed to be both.
I guess they're all supposed to be both somehow.
Yeah, I think they're all, they all exist at the nexus, right? That's what I think he says later down in the thread. They exist at the nexus of Marxism and postmodernism.
Yeah, that is the language he uses.
Yeah.
Sitting at the nexus of postmodernism and Marxism. Awesome. Incredible. Yeah,
which is cool because
because
it's not actually like neo-Marxism in that sense isn't really like a new category. It's just that there are postmodernists who also kind of mess with Marxism, and I know Kendi does like talk about capitalism occasionally. I don't know if that qualifies him as a neo-Marxist, but
anytime anyone talks about capitalism, they're a Marxist, right?
That's the rule. Yeah,
Adam Smith. Famously Marxist.
Yeah, Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman, classic neo-Marxist.
I mean, one thing I don't get about these folks is that if they really want Marxism to lose its intellectual traction and to like go away, then like why don't they work on making a society in which that might happen? Like there's good, you know what I mean? Like there's going to be Marxism for as long as Marx helps explain contradictions that don't seem to go away, right? And for as long as increasing wealth concentration happens, for as long as housing gets harder and harder to access, like for as long as there's increasing commodification of all facets of life, like I don't know, I just think it's funny that in his mind it's a battle of ideas where if we can just kind of push the Marxism ideas like away with some really not even good arguments because he doesn't offer those, but with like some vibes, some vibes, some
strong vibes
that like Marxists are pathetic, like resentful, like loners that live in their basement or parents' basement or something, right? Like if we can use enough vibes to push away, rather than present a critique of why people live with their parents still, but
I mean, that's great too, because it's again like the sort of like projection, like disavowal structure here is exactly the same, where like his whole thing and like these conservatives and reactionaries entire mode of, you were wondering before, Owen, like how does this work as a matter of like appeal or rhetoric, is a sort of self-victimization narrative, right? Where they're like, we are continually being oppressed and silenced by these postmodern neo-Marxists. We're being, pushed out by the left. They're the ones who are secretly running society. It's all a big sprawling conspiracy usually, which explains to you, the listener, why it is that you're disempowered, and a story that actually has nothing to do with real material dynamics. Like you said, a much more compelling story to tell someone who's still living in their basement in their 30s has to do with capitalism and the way in which, like, working class, the situation of people in the working class today is quite bad, even here in the imperial core, due to 40 years of, neoliberal austerity policy and so forth, right? But instead, if you could be like, no, these bad academic types are the reason, there's this sort of,
Just to pick up on that, I mean, there might be a real ethical crisis that Peterson offers a response to, like a crisis.
I think there is.
Of having a sense of where we stand, what we stand for. And so, like, when he comes along and says, I know, okay, well, there are many different ways, complicated ways we might understand this ethical crisis. You feel like you lack agency and, your connection to the world is atrophied and all this stuff. It might be because you're not making your bedroom and because people are making you use the right pronoun, making your bed, sorry. It might be because people are making you use, pronouns that you don't really want to use. You didn't even know the word pronoun a few years ago. And that's why you're in this ethical crisis. And, obviously, as per usual, the left has a more compelling explanation. Like, yes, there has been an atrophying of our connections to other people through different forms of class solidarity and whatever, right? So, but his explanation, it has a certain amount of traction because I think it does, I guess, index something real, some kind of real ethical crisis. That
I mean, people like, I think he's keyed into to a real sense of alienation, atomization, and he talks like and I think that, you know, the sort of you know, the young men who he's always talking about, and, you know, come to him, you know, they have, like, I think are oftentimes, you know, like dealing with feeling like their life isn't going the way they wanted it to go, like they, you know, like it's hard, you know, they haven't got to the point where they, you know, they wish they'd gotten, etc. Fair enough, right? But then the question, you know, just to start with, is whose fault is that? And his answer is, well, on the surface, his answer is it's your fault, right? Because you don't, you know, clean your room and, you know, stand up straight with your back up, and, you know, and all of that stuff, which at least,
which, let's be clear, I don't do either. You know, I have a dirty room and I have a terrible posture. So far I'm hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, and of course that's an appealing message because it's very actionable, right? I mean,
totally actionable. Totally.
Yeah, that's actually that. Yeah,
I mean, much
those
easier.
are goals you could achieve, Gil.
Yeah, much easier.
It's a hell of a lot.
Yeah,
it's a hell of a lot more actionable than like the things that actually need to be done. You know?
Yeah, like, oh yeah, we need to like figure out how to disarticulate state power and capitalist power. So I guess we'll start building some sort of like trade unions. This is going to be a long fight.
We need to overcome this atomization. It's like, okay, damn, well, that part of that is the destruction of labor unions. So how do we reconstitute those? And, you know, it's you know, now you're down a pragmatic path that is significantly more complicated than
very
just,
complicated.
You know, making your bed and, you know, disrespecting other people who you feel are less powerful than you.
It's way easier to do that. Yeah,
totally. It's way easier to do that, right? Like
yeah. It is interesting, like going back to our list too, like, because so Owen and I and our other co-hosts on our show have done episodes on some of these thinkers. And we have done episodes on Derrida and on Foucault. And like, I go back and forth on the extent to which I understand them as being postmodern in like the relevant sense, or even in like a non-caricatured sense.
Yeah, we should probably just say quickly that none of these people call themselves postmodern or would identify with that. You know,
and most of them explicitly reject being called Marxists.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, who's the? I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, I mean, I guess McKinnon, you know, like, in a very stupid way, I know what he means with about the neo-Marxist part, because she has things where she'll say, like, her understanding, you know, like she has moves that'll be like feminist versions of things that are explicitly modeled on, right, you know, Marxist ideas, which is not to say that she's a Marxist, right, but like that she sees a structural analogy between what Marxists are saying and what she's saying. I have no idea in what sense he thinks that the author of Points Against Postmodernism is a postmodernist. Like that I don't get at all.
Right.
But like other than that, right? I mean the Foucault. The funny thing for me about the Foucault inclusion is, like, I wrote my dissertation in part on Foucault, and I tried like super hard to squeeze every possible Marxist like bit of Marxism out of Foucault I could possibly find. I don't know how successful it ultimately was at the end, trying to make him more Marxist than he at least comes. It's really hard. I mean, you know, first of all, you have to get over all of the claims he makes where he says, you know, he rejects class as an explanatory like principle, where he rejects the notion of like, you know, revolution, or where he doesn't, you know, he rejects the agency of worker struggles. Like, you have to get past all of that. And then to figure, okay, like what, you know, there's a brief period in his work there where there is some overlap with some Marxist problematics, but I just find it funny
early 1970s,
early 1970s, where he's in, you know, a kind of post 68 atmosphere where, you know, the ideas of Althusser are prominent and all that. But yeah, the idea that you can just like that you just lump him in there is, I don't know, I find
the milieu, like the context was important too. A lot of folks in the French scene, and this is super the case for Foucault, is responding to the kind of structural, organizational, and ideological failures of the PCF, the French Communist Party at the time, which in the middle of the 20th century was just like outright Stalinist, right? And so when in interviews through the 70s, he's like, no, I'm not a Marxist, he means like, I'm not those assholes, right? Quite specifically. But at the same time, like the mode of analysis that he elaborates is not is not Marxist in so many ways, and it's very difficult, like you said, Owen, even to figure out how you would coordinate these things, how you'd bring them into sort of articulation with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sure. At least obviously, Foucault, like you watch his debate with Noam Chomsky. I mean, like he says things that are like, in terms of political conclusions, right, sound like very, I don't know, like Maoist even, right? Like, but even in that debate, right? I mean, if you actually listen to anything that he's saying, like theoretically, like none of it is really Marxist in any way, right? Like, and I guess I don't really know on this. Like, okay, so I mean, you mentioned, Naomi Klein earlier, who I think is a like good, honorable social democrat,
100%, and one who's very clear about the nature of the problem being specifically capitalist forms of social organization,
and who just sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and who just does like incredible work synthesizing empirical research.
Yeah,
right, which is something that I guess a postmodernist wouldn't really find a postmodernist doing, right? Like her books all gather like an insane amount of data and information and studies, like her climate book especially. But
no, I'm teaching her climate book this week actually, and it's like one of the best pieces of like politically motivated journalism to have come out in the past like half decade, I think. But even so, pretty clearly not a Marxist. She never uses Marxist categories. I know that in interviews she's identified herself as a non-Marxist. So yeah, like you said, like this is a clear-cut case. This one's solved, right? A good social democrat.
No, exactly, right? Which is like a fine thing to be, like
totally,
and a conjecturally like is a great thing to be, right? But like in 100%. But also, yes, not a Marxist, and doesn't seem to be a postmodernist, and doesn't seem to have much of anything to do with either of these things. Never mind sit at the nexus between them or whatever fucking it's supposed to be. So let's see. Judith Butler, with I mean,
not a Marxist.
A post-structuralist of sorts, especially
definitely a post-structuralist
in the earlier works, but.
Yeah, I mean, most famous, of course, for like her theory of gender performativity, which we can understand as like a post-structuralist intervention into debates that were being had about femininity in the late 80s and early 90s, which has been very influential and has nothing to do with Marx or Marxism. She almost never talks about Marx or Marxism. And I think the worry, actually, I think about Butler and Foucault being quite similar here insofar as I think they both have a lot of really good insights. I think that they have a lot of really good and important work, but that like there is a tendency to sort of relapse into a kind of, I want to say like defeatist liberal politics, a kind of very, anti-revolutionary, small scale kind of way of thinking about what transformative political practice looks like. I'm always on the pod making fun of Foucault for his last couple books being just like, check out these gymnastics diaries that the Romans had. And it's like, what are you, Michel, we have problems to solve, my dude. Like, you've lost the thread, I think. And like, these are the second and third volumes of the history of sexuality. The first of which was probably the most influential book of his in the American or Anglo-American scene, where again, like, show me anything remotely Marxian about the analysis in that book, which is about how like the injunction to tell stories about your sexuality gives you the sense that you have an inner truth called your sexuality, and this is like a form of power being exercised over you in this confessional scene like that. I mean, where are the relations of production? What are we talking about?
I mean, and with Butler, I guess I can see why Butler would be one of his enemies in a sense, and especially the early work in Gender Trouble, where she takes on the sex-gender distinction, right? The idea that, well, gender is maybe socially constructed, but sex is something that's like biologically essential and real. And she says, well, actually, sex also, or our knowledge of sex itself, also has a history. And again, the charitable way of reading it is that we have knowledge of sex that is mediated through. It isn't just immediate knowledge of biological essence, right? But that biological knowledge even of sex is also mediated through power dynamics and social structures and ideologies. So
yeah, the one sentence upshot of which is that like sex is always already gendered too, right?
Sex is already gendered too. Yeah,
right. Which again,
which I can see how, like,
that's-
someone like Jordan Peterson,
That's
who
where
made
that's where Marx lands at the end of the chapter on the working day.
That's so true. That's so true. I remember
That's right, yeah.
it's in volume. I thought it was in volume 3, right? Where he's
Oh,
talking
really?
about the law of the rate of the tendency of profits to fall. He's just like, also listen, sex always already gendered, folks. You want to jot that down, and maybe you can work on your microaggressions.
That's right, that's right.
Do a couple of land back statements.
I also want to point out, like,
acknowledgements.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. If okay, so Foucault, if like the best case for thinking that Foucault somehow has something to do with Marxism is that like in like early 70s Foucault like had like sort of immediate political conclusions that sounded Marxist, then I want to apply that standard consistently and say that if you're like a corporate diversity consultant, right, like that you're probably not very Marxist. And also, while we're on Judith Butler, like there are public records of this stuff. She was a Kamala Harris donor.
Yeah, that was a bummer, I will say.
I forgot about that.
That was a bummer.
That's tough.
That is tough. Yeah.
I think Judith Butler is a brilliant philosopher. Difficult to read, certainly. And not always the most clear, but that's that's tough on the political front.
Yeah, there is also like, I think, something to be said about the difference in kind between the sort of more overtly political work that she's done since then, her books like Precarious Life and Frames of War, where I worry actually a little bit. I'm not the only one. People have made this critique about the sort of valorization of the status of being precarious is kind of like leaning into neoliberal fragmentation and being like, oh, like, are we atomized and sort of, precarious? Like, are we precarious? And instead of a materialist analysis that says like, yes, because, the increasing antagonisms or contradictions of capital lead us to have less stability in our actual like lives, is like, no, this is like an ontological status and like it's good actually. It's like, I don't know. This is maybe even like an anti-Marxist line to take. Whereas I think that a lot of the stuff about gender performativity is at least compatible, obviously not directly Marxist, but plenty of Marxists buy very strongly into the theory of gender performativity. I mean, obviously some don't too, but like there's no immediate contradiction there. Some of the later stuff I think is a little more troubling.
I mean, I think it should be clear that I think for him that what makes them all kind of neo-Marxist is that instead of, again, to go back to the point I was making earlier, instead of class antagonism, you've got just like power antagonism. And that can take the form of like, power of white people over black people, of power over men over women, and everything gets filtered through this lens of like power relations and analyzing power relations. And I don't know, maybe it's worth thinking about why he thinks we shouldn't analyze things. I mean, so look, I obviously am more sympathetic with a Marxist class-oriented view of social contradictions and social antagonisms. But like, why is it so bad, I wonder, in his view, to try to understand the world through like power relationships? Like, bosses have power over workers, and like, it's for him because that's a really, really nefarious thing.
Yeah.
As soon as you start talking about power, that there is power, then
this is part and parcel with the whole of the like the reactionary reply to what you've been calling this sort of like ethical crisis, right? Where like the world is disorderly and chaotic. Order is good. Hierarchy is good, actually. Yeah. Right. And so that's
true. That is the crux.
And so I mean,
power relations, asymmetrical hierarchies asymmetrical power relations for him are like good. They're functionally pragmatic, and it's safer not to undermine them than.
Yeah, exactly. Once you start subjecting them to critical analysis, you risk what? Degenerating back into the great feminine chaos dragon or whatever. And there's no good.
Even though that commits him to the idea that like it's actually good. Like, let's say if like slavery is functionally pragmatic and society just kind of works well and is stable, and like, you can't. Who am I to argue with nature, right? That's his.
Big lobsters dominate little ones, baby.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, this is the point that. So I was on This Is Revolution a while ago. I was talking to Pascal Robert about this, but actually, never mind that. I'm stealing this point from Natalie Wynn, like a old Natalie Wynn video, 2018 on Jordan Peterson. I'd recommend people check out.
That's a classic.
If you haven't watched it, it's a treat, and it is actually. I think one of the ones where her philosophy training is like really put to good use, is because she's actually doing a lot of like, I mean, she's having fun with it, but like she's definitely doing the like taking Peterson's arguments slightly more seriously than they deserve thing. And
Totally.
she points out in there, I mean, so she's got a great riff about postmodernism, Marxism, but like also she points out in there that this basic argument that he's making about hierarchies, which is, we just said, right, that because hierarchies are so deeply ingrained in our nature, because they, it goes back to, what's so deep in our DNA that we have it in common with, lobsters and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? Which is such a weird argument in so many ways, right?
It's so cool. I love it. It's literally like the most absurd version of the naturalistic fallacy possible, right? Like he's not saying that like chimpanzees have hierarchical structures.
I mean, chimpanzees would be so much. I mean, first of all, it would be much more unambiguously true, and secondly, it would be such a better argument because it's
instead he's like these giant clawed sea cockroaches at the bottom of muck feeding at the bottom of the ocean. You're just like them. And it's like, what are you? What? And the way that they live is how you should normatively. What are we talking about?
I also just find something more basic and stupid about those arguments really confusing, which is that like if these natural tendencies and natural hierarchies are so intractable, like why aren't they just always prevailing ineluctably?
Nice.
Do you know what I mean? Like why? How are we managing to interrupt? We're so clever as humans that we're actually perturbing and disrupting the whole order of nature.
Right. So the argument is that we're somehow able to perturb them just a little bit,
right?
And that when we do, that's going to lead to chaos and gulags and et cetera, right? Like all the bad things, cats and dogs living together. And the question,
dogs identifying as cats,
right? We're it gets so much worse, right? So but the point that Natalie makes about this is that this argument is so general, right? It's so non-specific to like the specific things he's using it to, like,
for sure,
to object to, that you could, like a reactionary at any point in human history could just plug in this argument that's like, sure. I mean, it could be an antebellum abolitionist talking about masters and slaves. It could be, it could be like a 1790s, monarchist, like objecting to the French Revolution. I mean, it could be, I don't know, like a more hardcore monarchist and like, whatever that is, like 11th century England objecting to the Magna Carta. Like it could be anything.
Yeah, the level of generality is unhelpful, right? It's like it is because of its degree of generality. It doesn't pick out anything specific at all. And it makes it look like, if you're like not a careful thinker, that makes it look like, wow, I've got a really good explanatory framework and set of concepts on my hands because look at all the stuff that it explains. But in fact, this makes it explanatorily useless because it can explain anything. Right?
And anything that explains anything explains nothing. Right?
Nothing at all. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If your lobster-based natural hierarchy theory is capable of accounting at once for the Magna Carta and like postmodern, the character of racial discrimination and like, the new Jim Crow, well then I don't know how helpful this is.
And it's also like, I mean, the other thing is, I mean, presumably Jordan Peterson thinks that some of that social progress was good. I mean,
this is the cool thing, right? Like these reactionaries have to, like, on pain of being like too out of touch with like dominant doxa, have to admit that the results of previous progressive movements are good, but they can't allow that like the methods or processes by which they were achieved were okay. So like this is, and this is also bound up with the sort of way in which they like falsify the actual historical record here, either willingly or involuntarily, because they don't know what they're talking about, because none of these people are readers of history, right? But like, not even an overt reactionary, if they want to have any sort of media credibility, can say like, well, the civil rights movement was bad, right? And black people shouldn't have gotten it. But you actually can't say that if you want to maintain your sort of credibility in this media environment, this media ecosystem. But you do have to say that like either Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement were like super nonviolent, and they would have hated socialism, and they would have hated that people notice that there is racism somehow, right? That then if you notice that there's still racism, you're the real racist. And then, you know, BLM activists today, they're violent. They're like, you know, they're not doing this right the way that the old good version would have been. So like they have to do all these like sneaky rhetorical two steps, because even they can't say that like it's bad that women can vote and have jobs, right? Even though, you know, by their sort of logic actually abstract or like, you know, taken to
he
its
comes pretty
conclusion.
close sometimes.
He comes pretty close, actually.
He comes pretty close sometimes, especially on the women thing. Like, he doesn't touch
lipstick at work, right? That's the
exactly.
Sexual arousal. Oh, men and women can't work together.
Yeah.
Another funny aspect of that argument is that he, just in terms of trying to understand how he justifies hierarchies in terms of like the intractability of nature, because he does like, it's not like his view of an ideal society is modeled on like entirely on nature. Like for him, like Great Britain is for him like the paragon of like civilization. And there's like one of his more recent YouTube videos where he goes to Britain, and he goes around Cambridge and Oxford, and he's getting weepy and no, seriously, he's getting so sentimental, right? By the time he gets into like the main hall of Westminster, like in the Parliament building, he's bawling his eyes out, like at the greatness of, and I'm not exaggerating, right? He's bawling his eyes out at the greatness of like British civilization and everything that was achieved in the creation of like Parliament and like the People's House. And so that's why like there's actually an argument that goes one step further, I think, than just we need to configure society in a way that's commensurate with nature or something. It's that like we have at one point, I guess, sort of created a society that's commensurate with nature and how we're naturally supposed to live, and it's Britain, which is like amazing to think that the UK is the paragon of how we all have to configure our societies.
But presumably not the UK now.
No, but I guess it's institutionally, the UK's institutions.
I suppose proof of which is just its longevity, right? Like the institution of the monarchy and of the parliament goes back so long that, wow, this must be a really good bulwark against chaos. Look at how good the ordering has been. I would think would have to be something. Otherwise, I just have no idea for his preference. And I don't know. You watched him cry a lot more than I have. Maybe you have insight.
Which is funny. So, you know, earlier in the chat, Charles Wolford, who's a academic musicologist who actually did debate about postmodernism a while back, you know, and he's a good guy, but he has, you know, he did make a very, you know, fair point that made me laugh in the chat, which is, before we give Judith Butler too much shit about donating to Kamala Harris, let's remember how much we love Christopher Hitchens on this channel, which is, you know, totally fair. But I would say that the specific point about Kamala, you know, about that Judith Butler is that, you know, she's whatever she is, she's clearly not a Marxist, and you know, and similar points would apply if you're, you know, making excuses for the invasion of Iraq. But
yes, no kidding.
But
no war but class war, kids. Don't forget.
Yeah, exactly. But what you were saying was making me think of this. So there's this Christopher Hitchens book, small book pamphlet, you know, that he wrote in 1990 called "The Monarchy: A Critique of Britain's Favorite Fetish," which is really fun for this exact point, right? Because he spends all this time in that book going, you know, like making fun of the idea that the monarchy has historically been a source of stability, and, you know, you know, going through.
Oh yeah.
The history.
Well, no, like I said, they're either willfully misrepresenting it, or they just aren't paying attention to the actual historical record, and I can't tell which it is with these guys, right? Like I don't know if they actually think like the civil rights movement was peaceful, or if they actually think that the monarchy has been a source of stability, or if they're just lying. I can't tell with the case of Peterson.
Yeah,
you know?
There is a really, yeah, right. So I mean, the how far back question is always really interesting. So I think there's like a episode of Fire in Line where William F. Buckley had on Huey Newton, and Newton.
It's a great episode.
Yeah.
is challenging him at one point about like, which side he would have been on in the American Revolution. And and Buckley, to his credit, right? I mean, like it gives like he was such a, just a like self-aware, uninhibited weirdo about this stuff, like was what like actually thinks about it. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I would have sided with King George. You're right.
You got to at least respect the intellectual honesty.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. That's great. Yeah.
I said the last time we were talking about this, but man, our reactionaries today, like I have to say, they're just significantly dumber than last generation's reactionaries. And I think, Ben, you had a great explanation for that, which is that there was a lot bigger and more potent of a left back then, and so the reactionary thinkers also had to be more on point, more on their game. I've been thinking about that since you said that maybe Jordan Peterson's idiocy and the fact that it still has traction is symptomatic of the fact that, well, we just don't have as consolidated and powerful of a left in 2022 as, when Buckley was, interviewing Huey Newton.
Yeah, right, totally.
Wow.
Like, I'm sorry, like we don't like, where's our Huey Newton, right? Like,
no, totally, right. I mean, like, Hayek and von Mises were like engaging with socialists who, I would point out, were often, rooted in analytic philosophy and made good arguments, and B, were actually were confident that they were on like the cusp of historical change.
Yes.
And like you had to start thinking about the details and logistics of how socialism could work. And they were responding to that. And I mean, Peterson, the fact that he's responding to this weird, poorly defined mess of any actual Marxism that he detects existed in the world, anything that sort of reminds him of it if you squint just right. And, Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, Andrea Dworkin, Naomi Klein, Catherine McKinnon.
By the way, like, wouldn't Peterson have to be on board with Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon's like anti-pornography position? They're both like anti-pornography, really like sex negative rad femmes who I'm sure he would have like jived with these positions,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I know his good buddy Ben Shapiro would certainly be on board with this stuff, but
I know he's been militating against like promiscuity quite a bit, but I'm not sure. Like, does Peterson talk about pornography? Like, I imagine it's not. He doesn't vibe with it.
I'm trying to remember if I've heard him talk about it. I cannot imagine him saying anything minimally positive.
No.
Yeah, that would be an incredibly weird fit with his views.
Yeah, with everything else we know to be true about this goof.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh no, but that's not that bad.
Right. Yeah. No, he can't be on board. But again, like, it's just funny because of like the sort of like, my man just hasn't done his research, right? Like we made the joke at the beginning, right? It's been 3 years since the Peterson debate, since the Peterson Zizek debate. He's had time to go figure out what he meant. In the moment, he had his moment of head hung in shame, and in the meantime, he's concocted a list of people who have fundamentally incompatible views that are consistent with neither of the two categories that he's applying to them. Some of whom he agrees with in spite of himself. So, like, really. Just a swish, just a big slam dunk.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
I do think, gonna let you guys go in a minute, but I do think that just specifically on Derrida, I guess I can't prove this. I strongly suspect that most of what Peterson knows or remembers about Derrida is the titles of his books.
Almost certainly. Yeah. If anything, yeah.
I mean, I haven't done that deeper research, but I have word searched in his books like Foucault and Derrida, right? Because it seems to me like he has a special spite for the French postmodern neo-Marxists.
Yes.
And he will occasionally say something that vaguely resembles what Foucault was about. He would say, "Oh, everything's about power for Foucault." I mean, yeah, okay, that's true in a sense.
Sure, fine. I'll give it to you.
Yeah, but fine. But then with Derrida, he always just kind of slips it in and says, oh yeah, Derrida is interested in like marginalized people. Derrida didn't write like, okay, Derrida was interested. He wrote a book called, or he has a book called, what is it, Margins of Philosophy
Margins
or
of
something?
Philosophy,
So
yes.
maybe he has, maybe he saw like margins in one of the book titles, but like that's not really Derrida's shtick. I mean, especially, you know, he talks a little bit, I guess, about like textual deconstruction, maybe, but I don't know. I think he just kind of slides him in there.
He does just lump him in. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, well, right. I also think with, you know, Foucault, what power means there, which again is not often clear, but like, you know, but it is, you know, I think what it I think the things that word means for Foucault are not necessarily what Peterson is assuming, right? I mean, like, not like in fact, is certainly very distant, right, from like thinking of, I mean, thinking primarily in terms of like structural relations of power, in that sense that, you know, would
Totally.
be any kind of Marxism, you know, neo or otherwise, right? And with Derrida, I mean, like similar to the thing about the margins, I mean, I've heard Peterson make a big deal of the fact that Derrida has a book about Marx, you know, the Spectres of Marx, but like
which is not about Marx, it's about Hamlet and, you know, this thing called hauntology, which is like ontology. But, you know, because basically what he takes from Marx in that book is that Marx had a line where he says a specter is haunting Europe, and apparently Marx uses the line specter in various different places.
I will.
So, yeah,
I will defend Derrida a little bit more than Owen's giving him credit for here. But we don't need to get into all that right now. It is very funny that he thinks of Derrida as like a straight up, or even like a quote, again, not clear what this means, neo-Marxist, just on the basis of having
him a barely repentant Marxist.
A barely repentant Marxist. It's a completely ridiculous thing to say. I've been convinced by conversations with people who work on Derrida that there's value in that book, that it is worth taking seriously. Maybe not as
I wasn't denying that there was a value. I just don't think it's a book about Marxism or Marx really that much.
I mean, whether or not there's value in it, as far as I could tell, like what he actually takes from Marx in that book is like, oh, there's some kind of critical spirit there that's nice.
There's a good critical spirit, and it has something to do with how we relate to the future in the form of the projects that we're undertaking. And like, yeah, that's interesting. Sure, we can try to elaborate that in greater detail. But yeah, to your point, Ben, I wanted to just kind of agree with you, because Owen and I have had this conversation about Foucault. I think the first time we had this conversation about Foucault, Owen, was like 10 years ago, where we were like, it actually is really weird that how incompatible these two concepts of power are that we get in the Marxian tradition, which is about like specific action of structures organized hierarchically in order to dominate. And Foucault's trying to work out like a concept of power that is specifically not that, right? Which is very diffuse, which is sort of operative at like this weird micrological level, where like power is involved in, I hate giving the reactionaries anything, but like this is where you end up with a concept like microaggression, to be quick about it, right? And like that's actually pretty incompatible, or it's super unclear how you would make it compatible with an idea of like class antagonism as like a fundamental structuring feature of a society.
I mean, I see power, this like quite simply, and this doesn't cover everything Foucault ever says about power, but I see power in Foucault as just forces that determine conduct. Like power is like a force that determines conduct. And so like, I think Foucault did a great service to social analysis by doing what he calls like the microphysics of power. I'll go right down to like how a classroom is laid out, how a prison is configured and constructed, how different elements of like surveillance, examination, medicalization, and right down to like what's happening at the site of like the architecture of like a room or a hallway or whatever. Like, I think there's real value in that, and I think it's like those are all different sites at which our conduct is being shaped in different ways, right? Our conduct does get shaped when we're in school, gets shaped when we're in processes of medicalization and medical treatment or whatever, right? But I don't know. I guess like I don't see how. I don't know. Maybe I don't see the connection between that microphysics and like the microaggression thing. Maybe that's unfair to Foucault.
Well,
it's definitely quick. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, maybe not, right? I mean, I think that's what I'm saying about it's a little ambiguous, what some of these things mean, right? To the extent that that the power is not just an eccentric word choice for like things that shape us, but I mean that like some of the normal connotations of power are, like meant to at least be suggested by that, like his use of that term, right? Then I can see the microaggression thing a little bit more, right? Because you're saying that like power in some sort of political sense that we're worried about is super duper diffuse, etc. And like I could maybe see how that would go.
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the like Marxist critiques of the Foucauldian concept of power, that if it's so diffuse, our conduct is being determined from so many different directions and at every different level. Like, how do you actually ever oppose that, and like who opposes it, and with what means? And if power is everywhere, then he also says there's resistance everywhere, and then
a notion I despise.
Exactly. I don't like that idea. And so then it gets really hard to figure out that what is actually, organizing countervailing power, organized countervailing power against dominant power structures. What does that look like? And that there, I think Foucault's not helpful, really. So
yeah. Well,
anyways,
I mean, all of that like just makes me think of this great clip that when I was co-hosted Dead Pundit Society, we listened to this in like the first or second episode, and of Michael Albert, actually, who is in this very sort of like, wary old activist kind of mode, right? Is making fun of the phrase "fighting the good fight," and he's like, look, I mean, if you're just fighting to fight, why bother? I mean, just go to the beach or something. Like, why are you, why would you do this with
that's
your life,
true,
right?
yeah.
It's like, so it's like, okay, if we just sort of have like eternal power and eternal resistance, it's like I don't really know why that's something that I'm going to like particularly focus my energy on worrying about. Again, at least if these terms are being used in anything like their normal meaning.
That's why it's really funny that they haven't lumped that stuff in with the left. I mean, I think you can put Foucault to interesting and important uses, like as a leftist thinker or practitioner, but there is no, I don't think, immediate affinity between like someone like Foucault or like Derrida or even Judith Butler and like left anti-capitalism or anti-structural social movements. Like I just it's a very strained connection. At least I've tried to make it before, but it's a strained connection.
I think that there's specifically value, as we mentioned before, the work that he did in the 70s. Like is like historically useful stuff to know and to think about, right? And like for the purposes of people who are interested in capitalism and its legacy, like what are the sort of roots of this thing that we call the prison industrial complex, and like how to understand carcerality. Like, yeah, there's a whole hell of a lot there. We would not be where we are thinking about this stuff today if it weren't for Foucault. But like, still got to be a Marxist though, right, dog? I don't know.
Yeah, I will just say the thing that I find useful with Foucault from that period, right, is that he doesn't really offer an explanation of like economic relations of production or mode of production, but he can tell you a good story about the forms of governmental power that are necessary, that grew up with those economic systems, and that are actually in some ways pretty necessary for allowing them to reproduce themselves over, in a stable way over time, right? There's a governmental logic. He calls it disciplinary power. Sometimes he calls it, later like security, the logic of security or whatever. But there has to be a governmental structure that is, there was a governmental structure, an operation of power on the workplace, right? In the streets, with to deal with like how you manage poor people, all of that, right? Like that's all part of the story. But so that's why I think, yeah, Gil, you're right. That period, I think, of his work is extremely useful for a kind of Marxist analysis of history. But it isn't Marxist. It isn't Marxist.
Yeah, right. He's making points that can be, that can be very relevant for like figuring that out. But the analytic framework certainly isn't a Marxist analytic framework, and and the sort of political valence of it just doesn't seem like, look, I mean, if you have, again, unless you just think these are like really weird word choices and none of this really has anything to do with politics, like if you just have super duper diffuse power and super duper diffuse resistance, then like, you could have your small acts of, resistance and, sabotage and orgies and whatever until the end of time. But like, you're certainly no concept of, I don't know, like actually achieve, having some sort of strategy by which you achieve some sort of reasonably just society, and then like you figure out how to actually organize it, and presumably this is just this is just like all power is just reconstituted itself again, like
right.
so like it's really at that point it's like really hard to like get it up if in terms of your enthusiasm for that that project. So I think it's both analytically not Marxist, and it's just like politically it seems incredibly unhelpful to me, which is not to say that people shouldn't read those books, or it's not to say that you're not going to get some like really insightful things from those. You actually are, right? But like I don't think he's sitting on the nexus between Marxism and anything.
I mean, yeah.
There's
I think that point is right, though, that the analytical utility of Foucault, I think, is like pretty enormous in some ways, but I think the practical utility is maybe just non-existent as far as the kinds of practice that we're discussing or interested in.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. All right, guys. I think Angela Davis, postmodernist.
No.
Oh,
good word.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Don't think so.
Don't think so.
Because that was thrown in after the original tweet.
She did write. Well, she did write her dissertation on the original postmodernist Immanuel Kant.
Oh, that's true.
Oh, that's right. We didn't even touch on that yet. That this week, Kant has been thrown into this whole like cultural debate.
The original critical theorist.
Yeah, in the confirmation debate. In the confirmation hearings.
Oh yeah,
for Ketanji Brown Jackson. That's where someone I guess testified that critical race theory actually goes all the way back to Kant, and we need this this nominee to be on the Supreme Court to like basically disavow CRT, or she's basically endorsing Kant, who's like the original postmodern neo-Marxist.
So
effectively,
sick. I for one would like a Supreme Court justice who understands that we do not have epistemic access to the thing in itself, but we can have a transcendental deduction of the a priori categories of the understanding, right? So like that would be cool, I think. But Kant was hella racist, like one of the most racist dudes.
Also you read what Kant thought about the relations between masters and servants. I just don't think that there's I just don't think that that's that Marxist either, frankly.
I'm going to go out on the limb.
For me, isn't that Kant, the moment where we just realize the coherence of this? There's something else going on here that has nothing to do with the content of any of these thinkers, because Kant, noted racist and Enlightenment enthusiast, is now being like held up in Congress as the anti-racist or the OG anti-racist, anti-Enlightenment guy. It's incredible.
Something's going on.
Okay. So I have a new theory about this, which is that the nexus of postmodernism and Marxism is when you read books.
Ooh.
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah,
that seems right. It seems right. And as someone who, in spite of himself, has spent time reading books, I can tell you that it feels pretty bad at the nexus. Okay, it's pretty depressing here.
The final irony will be that like we'll be the last ones left being like, no, there's actually some interesting things in like Hobbes and Locke and what you used to call like the Western tradition. No, that's all precursors to postmodern neo-Marxism, and that's basically all leading to
the critical theory starts with the allegory of the cave. So
absolutely. Well, I mean, 100%. Hobbes himself said that the sovereign needs to define words. It is part of their purview, and they're going to tell us what words mean. You mean words don't just mean things that the sovereign decides?
Basically, the sovereign told you
he's a postmodernist.
Yeah. Basically, the Hobbesian sovereign says, that you have to have the pronouns you use dictated to you from on high. and that's that's where it all started.
All right. Well, in 2025, when he puts out the revised list, we'll have to do this again.
Thanks for having us on, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
Yeah, always, guys. All right. Thank you so much. So that was Owen and Gil, who are two of the four co-hosts of What's Left of Philosophy, which you should check out. You should listen to. It's good stuff. And meanwhile, speaking of philosophy, in about 30 seconds, I am going to be back with Jen for this week's philosophy segment, talking about somebody at the nexus between, I don't know what he's at the nexus between, but talking about Bill O'Reilly. So we'll be back in a minute.
Segment tonight just before Christmas.
There's the cat's tail.
Yeah, Shabazz is all over this. All right. So I'm here with Dr. Jennifer Burgess, and thought, last Thursday for the debate breakdown, I had Joe Payne on, and he had an idea for doing something a little bit different, which is instead of the usual sort of thing we do for that, which is usually either it's some, super classy debate that's, preserved on YouTube from long before the existence of YouTube, like William F. Buckley arguing with James Baldwin, or it's like something super current and internet-y, this Vosh Destiny, stuff like that. But he thought it would be fun to go back and watch the Christopher Hitchens appearances on Fox News for the New Atheism era, and it was fun. And we're clipping some of that up and put it on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But watching that made me think, what we haven't done, it'll be a fun philosophy segment. This one does not involve Christopher Hitchens. It involves a much less well-known atheist who's much less eloquent than Hitchens, and also, from what I gather, is not a particularly good guy in his personal life. Neither here nor there, but it is very, very funny. So I want to watch. This is a well, actually, here let's just set it up this way. Jen.
Yes. Shabazz is a professional.
Yeah. No, he does get a lot of screen time. Usually he just does audio commentary, but sometimes,
he's branching out.
Yeah, he's started to do more visual work. So I guess what Bill O'Reilly is doing here could be described as some sort of version of the teleological argument for the existence of God. Maybe not the best version, but just for fun, what is the teleological argument for the existence of God?
Well, telos is Greek for and.
Yeah.
So, it's an argument having to do with ends. We all tend toward a specific end or goal, and therefore there must be God.
Right?
Yeah, that's how that works.
Yeah. So this is what's sometimes called the argument from design, and like I tell intro students when we talk about this that you've never heard the phrase before, but the general idea that you can detect some sort of design in nature and infer the existence of God from that is definitely not something you're hearing for the first time right now. No. This is a general idea that's out there in the culture that you can somehow infer the existence of God from some feature or another of the world. So that's the teleological argument. Let's check out Jake. Sorry, I think you were starting to cue it up earlier, but let's check out Bill O'Reilly giving his version of the teleological argument.
Segment tonight, just before Christmas, an atheist group purchased a giant sign outside the Lincoln Tunnel here in New York City that said belief in Jesus as God is, quote, a myth. Then just last weekend, another sign appeared, this one in Huntsville, Alabama. The message says this about religion: they're all scams, picturing Christian, Jewish, and Islamic symbols on the sign. So what's going on? With us now, David Silverman, president of the American Atheist Group, which is responsible for both billboards. So why the insults?
Well, they're not insults. They're truths.
Wait. We just heard Nancy Pelosi said that it's pay as you go. So let's try to get into the truth.
This isn't about pay as you go. This is about telling the truth. Now, if people get offended because we're saying what we believe,
no.
That's not us insulting.
Let's just be regular guys instead of I'm a Catholic, you're atheist. We're just regular guys now, okay? You say something's a scam.
Yep.
On a
it is
sign.
scam.
And then you come in here where millions of people are watching you and say that's not an insult. What does the word scam mean to you?
Scam means it's deliberately misleading people.
And that's not an insult?
It's not an insult to the people. The people are just following.
It's not an insult to the people?
It's a statement to the people who are following the religion. And really, it's attacking the people who are in the pews. Wait a second.
Wait. Now, I'm stick with the insult, because this is certainly an insult in my opinion, and I know I'm not the smartest guy in town, but okay, so religion is a scam, but it's not the people's fault. They've just been lured in.
That's right.
Whose fault is it?
It's the leaders of the religion.
The leaders.
Of course.
All right.
I mean, this is not brain surgery.
The Pope.
The Pope, absolutely.
Right.
Look, this is not brain surgery, and this is not world news. Everybody knows religion is a scam. The only news here.
Everybody knows. I don't know, Mr. Silverman.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. I got to tell you.
You sit here and you're skeptical every day, and then you go to church and you get on your knees and you pray to an invisible man in the sky.
Invisible man in the sky.
You don't think that's a scam?
No, I don't.
You know,
and I'll tell you why.
A man that was built by a man.
I'll tell you why it's not a scam, in my opinion. All right. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes out.
See, the water, the tide comes in and it goes out, Mr. Silverman.
Never a miscommunication.
Awesome.
That's pretty fantastic.
So, yeah. All right. Now, I will say on the first part, I think Bill's guest is being a little ridiculous. That is an insult. That's fine.
I agree.
You know, I think Bill O'Reilly is right about that part. I also think he's right when he says he's not the smartest guy in town.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
Because, okay, Jen, why is this not the best version of the teleological argument for the existence of
God? The tides come in, the tides go out. That is very true. Never a miscommunication. Also very true. But when he says you can't explain why, well, that guy who looks like the devil there, as Stephen Colbert pointed out, he may not know why. The rest of us know why. We don't need God to explain why the tides come in and the tides go out, and there's never a miscommunication.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Isaac Newton, who, you know, like the development of Newtonian physics several centuries ago, was all over why the tide goes in and the tide goes out as to the, you know, gravitational pull of the moon, and you know, like that. There's a like that one seems like. Okay, I mean, there are different ways you can object to this argument. And the one I will actually say where we pulled that. Actually, no, it's not where we pulled that. It's where we're going to pull. We pulled a different part. We're going to show in a minute. But I was looking earlier at this, and the video. One of the videos I was looking at was one that you cut for your students, right? In your critical.
I did not cut it. I received it as it was from Ryan Lake. So shout out to Dr. Ryan.
Okay, so Dr. Lake cut it and then sent it to you, and you posted it on your channel for your critical thinking students. But it's like a public thing; anybody can look at it, and you're using it as a example of an argument form, which is
the appeal to ignorance. I never know when you're just pausing, or you know, when I'm supposed to.
No, you seem to. You seem to be catching all of it.
But yeah, we use that as an example of the argument for ignorance. I don't know, therefore it's true.
Yeah. So even if you were talking about something that is a genuine scientific mystery, right? That like we don't, you know, I mean, whatever, get into something about quantum gravity or whatever, right? Like, and it would genuinely be true. That like
I don't know X or how to explain X or how to account for X does not automatically mean therefore God exists.
Yeah. I mean it's you could, I mean, it's like on the, you know, that did you ever watch Ancient Aliens?
No.
Of course you didn't know.
Why would I do that?
Because I don't know. It's perversely funny. So okay.
It seems to ruin lives.
So our friend Noel,
the people I know.
Our friend Noel Alphonse went to grad school with. I remember being over at his place a couple times and watching a little bit of Ancient Aliens. And I really liked that they do this thing where all the sentences would start with like three setups, like three, Ancient Alien scholars speculate that it is possible that, there'd be like a couple more after that, right? Before they'd actually commit to doing the sentence that came after it. But, there it would all be stuff like, well, we don't know how the Egyptians built the pyramids, so
aliens.
And that's not a good inference.
No. No, it is not.
At best, there are things that you like, maybe details that you might not have, or things that you can't fully explain. Like you can't give us the complete mechanics of one possible explanation, in this case that the Egyptians did it. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, I know there's probably somebody watching right now who's like a ancient Near Eastern studies graduate student or something, who's gonna be like, well, actually we know exactly how they did it. It's like, okay, whatever, suspend that for the purposes of the example, right? Like, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you genuinely did not know how pyramid construction worked. Then it would still be really weird to say, therefore, aliens did it, since at best what you're talking about is absence of evidence for one possible explanation, and you're using that as being by itself evidence for another possible explanation, which doesn't really make sense, because, like in that example, we also don't know the mechanics of how the aliens did it, I would assume.
In their alien way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now I believe the aliens built the pyramids.
No, so this is called the God of the gaps. Wherever you have a gap in your knowledge, you plug God into that gap. But as we gain more and more knowledge, then we pull God out of there and stick the knowledge in there. And what's going to happen when we run out of gaps for God? Then what happens to this argument for God, that you need him to explain X, Y, Z, once we've already explained X, Y, Z in some other way?
Yeah. And just the fact that you don't know what the natural explanation is for X, Y, and Z doesn't by itself give you a reason to think that there's a supernatural explanation for X, Y, and Z. I mean, you'd want independent evidence of that.
Why do we fill the gap with God? Why don't we fill it with aliens?
Right?
Some people fill it with aliens.
Strawn McCollum says Egyptologists pretty much agree the pyramids were built with very, very simple math and engineering and lots of slave labor.
That seems right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that does have a certain ring of truth to it. So but even if we did, even if there was something like, oh, we have absolutely no idea how they did this particular part of it, that wouldn't by itself give you a reason to favor any particular alternate explanation. You'd have to actually compare the explanations and see, do we do, what philosophers of science call inference the best explanation.
Yeah. Do you have evidence for the explanation you are giving? Do you have evidence to show that it is God who is pulling the tides up and down? Never a miscommunication.
That's such a weird example. Like in Bill O'Reilly's head, is it just that each individual instance of the tide coming in and out, there's a separate act of divine will?
That's a good question.
God has decided, tomorrow might be different, but today it is my will that the tide comes in.
But will it go back out? That's the question.
Exactly.
Hey there, Shabazz. We need you to confirm the alien hypothesis.
Yeah. So again, if he had come up with a genuine scientific mystery, this would still not be a great argument.
It would not, but the fact that he chose the tides makes it even more impressive. But yeah, even if you did choose something that we don't know the answer to, why does that make the answer God?
Yeah, it's very unclear. Certainly, at least it's very unclear to me. Also, I think that Bill O'Reilly should have paid more attention in his high school science classes.
Most likely.
But yeah. All right then. we are going to we're going to leave that there. With Bill O'Reilly's credentials as a philosophical theologian continuing to be somewhat dubious.
A separate tiding.
Charles says, if God needs to will a separate tiding for every moment, the universe is clearly not well designed. That is a good point.
Ooh, doesn't that mean Bill worships the moon?
Well, on that subject,
yes, we have an answer for that.
We do have an answer to that. We were talking about this, and I was like, oh, so we'll just watch some of the original interview, and Jen was like, yeah, but we got to watch the Colbert thing. I was like, well, I was talking about the argument of the original interview.
No, but we can't do it without.
She's like, yeah, but the Colbert thing is funny. So
yeah.
Fair enough. I will say, it is kind of weird to watch this now. I think this was really the height of his powers. So let's do.
My students love it when I play it for them. They love it.
All right, so let's do. This comes after he's played what we watched. So let's play it out. We will. Well, actually, we'll come back. We'll come back for just a second after this is done. But let's do the Colbert clip.
There is a God because we don't know what causes the tides and we can never know what causes them. My best guess is that the ocean levels rise when God gets in the bath and lower again when he gets out. And he takes 2 baths a day because cleanliness is next to himliness. So get used to it, atheists. There is a God, he created the tides, and no one can explain what causes them.
Actually, Stephen, I can.
Astrophysicist and director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil, thanks so much.
Hello.
Hey, so, Neil, what are you doing here?
Well, oh, thank you.
What are you doing here,
I was at
Neil?
the planetarium at my office, and I overheard your confusion about tides, so I rushed right over.
How did you get here so fast?
I have a wormhole.
Wow.
So, Stephen, the changing tides are caused by a couple of factors, but mostly the moon.
The moon makes the tides change. So the oceans are werewolves. That makes sense. Okay, thanks for stopping by, Neil.
No, Stephen, no, that's not what I said. As the moon orbits the Earth, the gravitational force exerts a pull on the side of the Earth closest to the moon, and that raises the tides.
So the moon controls the tides?
Exactly.
So the moon is God. All hail Luna! All hail Luna, virgin bride of Father Night! We must stone heretic Neil Armstrong for soiling her face with his boot!
Stephen, the moon is not God. It's just astrophysics.
And you know this because?
I'm an astrophysicist.
So you control the tides. Neil deGrasse Tyson is God! Neil before Neil!
Yeah.
That never gets less funny. Neil before Neil!
Yeah.
Every now and then when I'm going to go off to take a shower, I tell Ben, cleanliness is next to himliness. And I never know if he knows what I'm talking about or if this is just one of those Jen's babbling again. Best to not question it.
Fair enough. Yep. All right, guys. So things you should have gotten from this episode are that every analogy that's made on Twitter involving Will Smith is a bad analogy. And Jordan Peterson.
Team Will, by the way. Team Will.
I know you are.
I'm telling the world, Team Will.
So that's number one. Number two is Jordan Peterson does not have a well thought out list of the postmodern neo-Marxists. Kevin had 3 years to come up with it. I'm officially not impressed. And number three, we do actually know why the tides go in and the tides go out.
We're not even astrophysicists.
Yeah, no, I think you could not be an astrophysicist and still have a pretty good handle on that one. In any case, though, we are going to be doing the post game in like 90 seconds after we're done here. The great Matt Leck will be joining us for that. We are going to be watching the leaked audio for the captive audience meeting. We've got some other fun videos we are going to be showing Matt. Should be a very good time. If you are not yet a GTAA patron, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgess. That link is in the description, and get patron exclusive post games after every regular Monday night episode, access to the Discord server, the Sopranos recaps, lots of other stuff. Most importantly, our eternal love and gratitude for helping us to keep this going. All right.
Team Snoopy forever.
Left is best.